Welcome to our comprehensive training program on ANSI ASNT CP-189 2024, Qualification and Certification of Non-Destructive Testing Personnel. My name is Yalapa, and I'll be your instructor throughout this Level 3 training course. This program is designed for NDT professionals, Level II personnel preparing for Level 3 certification, QAQC engineers, supervisors, and anyone involved in managing an employer-based NDT certification program. Before we begin, it's important to understand one fundamental concept. CP-189 does not certify NDT personnel. Instead, it establishes the minimum requirements that an employer must follow to qualify and certify its personnel through a documented certification procedure approved by a designated NDT Level III. Throughout this course, we'll study the standard clause by clause, explaining not only what each requirement states, but also why it exists and how it is implemented in real industries such as oil and gas, petrochemical plants, pressure vessel fabrication, power generation, and pipeline construction. We'll cover qualification levels, training and experience requirements, examinations, certification procedures, recertification, employer responsibilities, record keeping, and the significant changes introduced in the 2024 edition. I'll also highlight practical field applications, common audit findings, and important examination points to help you understand the intent behind the standard rather than simply memorizing it. By the end of this course, you'll have the knowledge and confidence to interpret CP-189 requirements and apply them effectively within your organization's certification program. Let's begin by understanding the learning objectives of this course and the knowledge you'll gain throughout the training.
Before we begin exploring the clauses of CP-189, it's important to understand what you should achieve by the end of this training. Having clear learning objectives will help you focus on the concepts that are most important for certification examinations and practical implementation. Our first objective is to understand the purpose and scope of ANSI ASNT CP-189 and how it differs from other certification systems such as SNT TC1A, ISO 9712, and ASNT Central Certification. While these documents all relate to personnel qualification, they follow different approaches, and understanding those differences is essential for both examinations and industry practice. Next, we'll study the key definitions used throughout the standard. Terms like qualification, certification, certifying authority, experience, formal training, and employer have specific meanings within CP-189. A clear understanding of these definitions will make the later clauses much easier to interpret correctly. We'll then examine the 6 qualification levels recognized by CP-189, including their responsibilities, authority, and limitations. Understanding what each level can and cannot do is fundamental for managing NDT personnel and maintaining compliance. Another major objective is to understand the minimum requirements for training, experience, examinations, certification, recertification, and record keeping. These are the foundation of every employer certification program and are frequently verified during client and third-party audits. Finally, we'll review the 2024 edition changes, focusing on the revisions that affect qualification.
Now that we've reviewed the course objectives, let's understand why ANSI ASNT CP-189 is one of the most important standards for NDT personnel qualification in today's industry. CP-189 is an ANSI-approved American national standard, which means its requirements use mandatory language, such as shall. Unlike a recommended practice, it establishes the minimum requirements that employers must meet when qualifying and certifying NDT personnel. This makes it a highly respected document during customer audits, regulatory inspections, and third-party assessments. One of the most important principles of CP-189 is that it follows an employer-based certification system. The standard itself does not issue certificates. Instead, each employer must develop a written certification procedure, designate a qualified NDT Level III to administer the program, and ensure that personnel meet the required training, experience, vision, and examination criteria before certification is granted. In practice, you'll find CP-189 widely used in industries where inspection quality directly affects safety and reliability. These include oil and gas facilities, petrochemical plants, pressure vessel and heat exchanger fabrication, pipeline construction, power generation, and boiler manufacturing. Many client specifications require personnel to be qualified in accordance with ASNT TC-1A or CP-189, making compliance essential for project execution. From an audit perspective, inspectors don't evaluate only the inspection results. They also verify that the individuals performing those inspections are properly qualified and certified according to the employer's written procedure. Missing training records, expired vision examinations.
In this section, we'll examine the scope of CP-189 and understand what the standard is intended to achieve. Every standard begins with a scope because it defines its purpose and establishes the boundaries for its application. Clause 1.1 states that CP-189 establishes the minimum requirements for the qualification and certification of both non-destructive testing, or NDT personnel, and predictive maintenance, or PDM personnel. It does not provide detailed inspection procedures or acceptance criteria. Instead, it defines the minimum competency requirements that personnel must satisfy before they can be certified by an employer. Clause 1.2 explains that the standard specifies the minimum education, training, and experience requirements, along with the criteria for documenting an individual's qualifications. This ensures that certification is based on objective evidence rather than personal judgment. Clause 1.3 requires every employer to develop and maintain a written certification procedure. This is one of the most important requirements in CP-189 because the standard itself cannot be implemented unless the employer establishes a documented certification program. Finally, Clause 1.4 allows employers to include additional requirements when necessary. These may include customer specifications, project-specific qualifications, or additional technique endorsements required by codes or contracts. Exam tip. Remember that CP-189 establishes the framework, while the employer's written certification procedure implements the requirements. Understanding this relationship is essential for both examinations and industry practice. Next, we'll discuss common examination questions and practical field observations related to the scope of CP. Now, let's look at some practical points that are frequently discussed during Level 3 examinations, interviews, and client audits. The first and most important point is that CP-189 does not certify individuals. It only establishes the minimum requirements for qualification and certification. The actual certification is issued by the employer through an approved written certification procedure. This distinction is one of the most frequently tested concepts in Level 3 examinations. Another important development in recent years is the inclusion of predictive maintenance, or PDM, within the scope of CP-189. Many organizations now manage both traditional NDT methods and PDM activities under a single certification procedure, creating a unified qualification system for inspection and condition monitoring personnel. A common mistake is confusing CP-189 with an individual certification program such as the ASNT Level III credential. An ASNT Level III certificate demonstrates that an individual has met ASNT's certification requirements. However, to perform duties under CP-189, that individual must also be certified by the employer in accordance with the employer's written certification procedure. Field example. During an audit, a company may present an employee's ASNT Level III certificate. While this confirms the individual's credentials, the auditor will also request the employer's certification record, written procedure, training records, and examination results to verify compliance with CP-189. Key point: personal certification and employer certification are related but not the same. Understanding this difference.
Before interpreting any standard, it's essential to understand its terminology. CP-189 provides clear definitions to ensure that employers, auditors, and certification authorities interpret the requirements consistently. Let's begin with the administrative terms. Certification is the employer's written confirmation that an individual has met all applicable qualification requirements. Certification procedure is the employer's documented process that defines how personnel are qualified, examined, certified, and recertified. The certifying authority is the individual designated by the employer to authorize certifications. The term employer refers to the organization responsible for implementing the certification program and maintaining qualification records. Now let's look at the qualification terms. Education refers to formal academic instruction, while formal training is a structured NDT training program approved by the responsible Level 3. Experience means actual hands-on work performing NDT activities. Classroom training alone does not count as experience. An examination is a controlled assessment used to evaluate knowledge or practical skills. A closed-book examination means candidates cannot use reference materials unless specifically permitted by the examination procedure. Exam tip: many examination questions are based on these definitions. Understanding the terminology will make.
In this section, we'll continue with the technical definitions that are frequently referenced throughout CP-189. One important term is instrument calibration, which is the comparison or adjustment of an instrument against a traceable reference to ensure measurement accuracy. This should not be confused with instrument standardization, which is the routine adjustment of equipment using a reference standard before performing an inspection. Another distinction is between an NDT method and an NDT technique. A method is the overall inspection discipline, such as ultrasonic testing or radiographic testing. A technique is a specific application within that method, such as immersion ultrasonic testing or phased array ultrasonic testing. The standard also defines a grading unit, which represents a section of a practical examination specimen used to evaluate a candidate's ability to detect and interpret discontinuities. The 2024 edition introduces a revised definition of non-destructive testing based on ASTM E1316 and updates the definition of predictive maintenance to clearly distinguish condition monitoring from traditional NDT activities. Additional terms such as outside organization and personalized instruction recognize modern training methods and the use of external Level 3 services. Key point: understanding these definitions helps eliminate confusion and ensures consistent application of the standard during qualification and certification. Next, we'll examine the NDT qualification levels recognized by CP-189.
After understanding the terminology, let's look at the qualification levels recognized by CP-189. The highest technical level is the NDT Level III. To qualify, the individual must hold a current ASNT Level III, ASNT 9712, ACCP Professional, or approved equivalent credential, and must also be certified by the employer in accordance with CP-189. The Level 3 is responsible for procedures, technical guidance, examinations, and certification activities. Level 1 and Level 2 personnel are certified by the employer after successfully completing the required training, experience, and examinations. They are responsible for performing inspections according to their authorized scope. The standard also recognizes legacy certifications in areas such as neutron radiography and vibration analysis, allowing previously qualified personnel to maintain their certifications under defined conditions. Exam tip: a common mistake is assuming an ASNT Level 3 certificate alone authorizes an individual to perform Level 3 duties. Under CP-189, employer certification is also required. Next, we'll study the 6 qualification levels and their specific responsibilities.
CP-189 recognizes 6 qualification levels, each with defined responsibilities and authority. The NDT Level 3 develops procedures, interprets codes and standards, selects inspection techniques, approves procedures, and oversees training, examinations, and certification. The NDT Level II performs inspections, interprets results, prepares reports, and may supervise Level 1 personnel and trainees while working within approved procedures. The Level 2 limited certification applies to specific techniques such as ultrasonic thickness measurement or radiographic image interpretation, where a full Level 2 qualification is not required. The Level 1 performs specific inspections and evaluations under the guidance of Level 2 or Level 3 personnel and may only make acceptance decisions when specifically authorized. A trainee is not yet certified and must always work under direct supervision. Trainees cannot independently perform inspections or issue reports. Finally, the NDT instructor is responsible for delivering structured training programs approved by the responsible Level 3. Understanding these responsibilities is essential because examination questions often compare the authority and limitations of each qualification level.
Next, we'll discuss common interview questions and practical considerations related to these qualifications.
Let's conclude this section by reviewing several important concepts that frequently appear in interviews, examinations, and industry audits. One common interview question is whether a Level 1 technician can make an accept or reject decision. Under CP-189, a Level 1 may only perform this responsibility when specific written authorization has been provided by the responsible NDT Level III. Otherwise, acceptance decisions remain the responsibility of qualified Level 2 or Level 3 personnel. Another important concept is the purpose of the Level 2 limited certification. This category allows employers to qualify personnel for narrowly defined inspection activities, such as ultrasonic thickness measurement or radiographic image interpretation, without requiring the full scope of Level 2 training and experience. A common compliance issue involves trainees performing independent inspections or signing reports. CP-189 clearly states that trainees must always work under the supervision of certified personnel and cannot independently conduct examinations or issue inspection reports. Exam tip: be familiar with the responsibilities and limitations of every qualification level. Questions comparing the authority of trainees, Level 1, Level 2, and Level 3 personnel are among the most frequently asked topics.
Before anyone can become a qualified NDT professional, they must first build a strong technical foundation through structured training. In this section, CP-189 establishes the minimum training requirements that every employer must follow before certifying Level 1 or Level 2 personnel. One of the most important principles to understand is that CP-189 does not allow random or informal training. Every training program must follow a structured course outline that has been reviewed and approved by the employer's designated NDT Level III. The technical content should be based on the body of knowledge defined in ANSI/ASNT CP-105, which serves as the official topical outline for NDT training. However, the Level 3 is not limited to teaching only CP-105 topics. If additional knowledge is necessary for a particular industry or application, the Level 3 has the authority to include extra subjects. For example, a refinery may require additional training on API standards, while an aerospace manufacturer may include customer-specific procedures or regulatory requirements. This flexibility allows employers to tailor training to their operational needs while still complying with the minimum requirements of CP-189. The slide also reminds us that every NDT method has a specified minimum number of classroom training hours. These values are listed in Appendix A and are among the most frequently tested numbers in ASNT certification examinations. For example, a Level 1 magnetic particle testing candidate requires 12 hours of formal training, while liquid penetrant testing requires 4 hours and ultrasonic testing requires 40 hours. These differences reflect the complexity of each inspection method. Techniques involving advanced physics, signal interpretation, or sophisticated equipment naturally require more classroom instruction than simpler inspection methods. It's important to remember that these are minimum requirements. An employer or Level 3 may always require additional training if the work involves specialized materials, complex geometries, advanced equipment, or critical service conditions. Meeting the minimum hours does not automatically mean a person is fully competent. It simply establishes the minimum acceptable educational foundation. In the previous slide, we discussed the formal training requirements established by CP-189. However, classroom training alone is not enough to produce a competent NDT professional. Experience gained through actual inspection work is equally important. In this section, we'll examine how CP-189 addresses practical experience, recognition of previous qualifications, instructor eligibility, and the use of outside organizations. Let's begin with experience requirements. CP-189 recognizes that non-destructive testing is a practical profession. While theory provides the foundation, inspectors develop true competence by working with real components, real equipment, and real inspection situations. For that reason, the standard requires candidates to complete a minimum amount of documented practical experience before they become eligible for certification. For Level 1 and Level 2 personnel, these minimum experience hours are specified in Appendix A, while candidates seeking Level 2 limited certification follow the requirements listed in Appendix B. These appendices define exactly how much practical experience is required for each NDT method and technique. it's important to understand that experience means actual on-the-job inspection work. Time spent attending classroom training or watching instructional videos cannot be counted as practical experience. The intent is to ensure that certified personnel have demonstrated their skills under real working conditions before being allowed to perform inspections independently. For Level 3 personnel, the requirement is different. CP-189 recognizes that obtaining an ASNT Level III certificate already involves extensive education, documented experience, and rigorous examinations. Therefore, if an individual holds a current ASNT Level III certificate in the applicable method, the experience requirement under Section 4.2.3 is considered satisfied. The next topic addresses previous training and experience. Many inspectors change employers during their careers. Naturally, the question arises, can previous training and work experience be transferred? The answer is yes, but only under strict conditions. CP-189 allows an employer to recognize previous qualifications only after the employer's designated Level 3 has verified and documented the evidence. Training certificates, experience records, qualification logs, employer documentation, and other supporting records must all be reviewed before any previous credit is granted.
Having completed the qualification requirements described in Section 4, we now arrive at one of the most important reference sections in the entire CP-189 standard, Appendix A. This appendix is more than just a table of numbers. It defines the minimum training and practical experience that every employer must verify before certifying Level 1 and Level 2 personnel. If you're preparing for an ASNT Level 3 examination, writing an employer certification procedure, or auditing an NDT qualification program, Appendix A is a section you should know thoroughly. Many examination questions and audit findings are based directly on these qualification requirements. Before we look at the individual methods, let's first understand how this table is organized. Each method includes 3 important qualification requirements. The first is the number of formal training hours, which represents structured classroom or approved instructional learning. The second is the minimum practical experience required in that specific inspection method. Finally, the table specifies the total NDT experience required before certification can be granted. These requirements are cumulative. A candidate must satisfy all applicable requirements, not just one. Completing the classroom training alone does not qualify someone for certification, and extensive field experience cannot replace the required formal education. CP-189 requires both theoretical knowledge and documented practical experience to produce competent inspectors. Now, let's examine the methods listed on this slide. The first method is acoustic emission testing, commonly known as AE. Acoustic emission is a passive inspection technique that detects high-frequency stress waves released by active defects while a component is under load. Unlike many conventional NDT methods, AE does not generate an inspection signal. Instead, it listens for energy released naturally by. In the previous slide, we examined the qualification requirements for several conventional NDT methods, including acoustic emission, eddy current, leak testing, penetrant testing, magnetic particle testing, and magnetic flux leakage. In this slide, Appendix A continues with some of the most widely used and technically demanding inspection methods found across the oil and gas, petrochemical, aerospace, and power generation industries. Let's begin with radiographic testing, commonly known as RT. Radiographic testing is one of the oldest and most trusted volumetric inspection methods. It uses X-rays or gamma rays to produce an image of the internal condition of a component, allowing inspectors to detect discontinuities such as porosity, slag inclusions, lack of fusion, cracks, and internal corrosion without cutting the material open. Because RT involves radiation safety, image quality evaluation, exposure calculations, and interpretation of radiographic images, CP-189 requires substantial classroom training and practical experience before certification. These requirements ensure that inspectors can perform examinations safely while producing reliable inspection results. The next 2 methods are computed radiography, or CR, and digital radiography, commonly called DR. These techniques represent the evolution of conventional film radiography into digital imaging technologies. Instead of using traditional radiographic film, CR uses imaging plates, while DR uses digital detector panels that produce images almost instantly. Although the image acquisition technology differs, the inspector must still understand radiation physics, exposure techniques, image quality indicators, geometric unsharpness, and defect interpretation. For this reason, CP-189 establishes qualification requirements comparable to those of conventional radiographic testing. One significant advantage of digital radiography is faster image acquisition and easier storage, transmission, and analysis. However, digital systems also introduce new challenges, such as detector calibration, image processing, and proper evaluation of digital image quality.
Now that we've completed the training and experience tables in Appendix A, it's important not to overlook the notes that follow. Many candidates spend a great deal of time memorizing the qualification hours, but ignore these notes. In reality, these notes contain important rules that explain how the requirements should be applied in practical situations. They are also common sources of examination questions and audit findings. Let's begin with Note B, which addresses direct to Level II certification. Under many employer qualification systems, an individual progresses from trainee to Level 1 and then to Level 2. However, CP-189 recognizes that this is not the only possible pathway. The standard allows a candidate to be certified directly to Level 2 without first becoming a certified Level 1. This is often referred to as direct to Level 2 certification. However, there is an important condition. The candidate must complete the combined training and experience requirements for both Level 1 and Level 2. In other words, skipping Level 1 certification does not reduce the qualification requirements. Instead, the individual must demonstrate that they have accumulated the total education and practical experience expected from someone who has progressed through both qualification levels. This flexibility is particularly useful for experienced personnel who have already gained substantial supervised experience before entering an employer certification program. For example, an inspector who has worked for several years under qualified supervision may already possess sufficient practical experience to satisfy both Level 1 and Level 2 requirements. Instead of certifying them twice, the employer may certify them directly as Level 2, provided all minimum requirements are fully documented. The next important guidance appears in Notes F, G, and I, which deal with additional technique qualifications. Many NDT methods contain several specialized techniques. For example, radiographic.
We've now completed Appendix A, which established the qualification requirements for full Level 1 and Level 2 certifications. In this slide, we move into Appendix B, where ANSI ASNT CP-189 introduces a specialized certification category known as Level II Limited Certification. At first glance, many people assume that a limited certification is simply a lower-level qualification. That is not the case. A Level II Limited Certification is designed for personnel who perform a very specific inspection task within a limited scope, rather than the full range of activities expected from a conventional Level II inspector. Think of it as a specialist certification instead of a general certification. This approach allows employers to qualify personnel for repetitive, well-defined inspection activities without requiring them to master every application within an NDT method. For example, during refinery shutdowns or large construction projects, an inspector may spend the entire project performing only ultrasonic thickness measurements. That individual is not evaluating weld defects, sizing discontinuities, or performing angle beam inspections. Their responsibility is limited to measuring remaining wall thickness accurately. Similarly, another technician may spend the entire project interpreting radiographic images without actually operating the radiographic equipment. In these situations, a Level II limited certification provides an appropriate qualification pathway. Let's look at the table shown on this slide. The first category is radiographic image interpretation for a non-radiographer, covering conventional film radiography, digital radiography, computed radiography, and computed tomography. Notice that this candidate requires 40 hours of formal training and 220 hours of practical experience. The higher training requirement reflects the fact that the individual does not already possess radiographic inspection experience. Before interpreting images, they must first develop a thorough understanding of radiographic principles, image quality,
We've now completed the first 4 sections of ANSI ASNT CP-189 2024, and before moving into the certification process, this is a good opportunity to review the key concepts we've learned so far. The first and perhaps most important point to remember is that CP-189 itself does not certify NDT personnel. This is one of the most frequently misunderstood concepts among new inspectors. CP-189 establishes the minimum requirements that an employer must follow, but the actual certification is issued through the employer's written certification procedure. That procedure must be reviewed and approved by the employer's designated NDT Level III before it can be implemented. Next, we've learned that CP-189 recognizes 6 qualification levels, each with clearly defined responsibilities. These include the trainee, Level 1, Level 2, Level 2 Limited, Level 3, and NDT instructor. Understanding the authority and limitations of each level is essential because many examination and interview questions focus on what each certification level is permitted to do. We also explored the qualification requirements that every candidate must satisfy before certification. Training, documented practical experience, instructor qualifications, and employer responsibilities all work together to ensure that certified personnel are technically competent. Simply attending a training course or accumulating years of employment is not sufficient. Every requirement must be properly documented and verified. Finally, we examined one of the most significant updates in the 2024 edition. CP-189 now provides clearer distinctions between non-destructive testing and predictive maintenance, while also formally recognizing the ASNT 9712 certification program alongside the existing ASNT and ACCP certification pathways. These changes reflect the continuing evolution of modern inspection technologies and international certification practices.
Section 5 shifts our attention from individual qualifications to the employer certification system itself. While previous sections explained how personnel become qualified, this section explains how an organization establishes a compliant certification program. The first requirement is straightforward but extremely important. Every employer intending to certify NDT personnel under CP-189 shall develop and maintain a written certification procedure. The word shall indicates a mandatory requirement, not a recommendation. This written procedure serves as the governing document for the organization's entire qualification and certification process. During customer audits or accreditation assessments, it is often one of the first documents requested because it demonstrates how the employer complies with CP-189. The standard then identifies 6 mandatory elements that every certification procedure must contain. The first element defines the duties and responsibilities of personnel at each certification level. This ensures that everyone understands the authority and limitations associated with their certification. The second element establishes the training requirements, specifying how personnel will receive the education necessary for qualification. The third addresses experience requirements, explaining how practical experience will be documented, evaluated, and verified before certification. The fourth covers examination requirements, including the general, specific, and practical examinations required for each certification level. The fifth addresses records and documentation. Every employer must define how qualification records will be created, controlled, retained, and protected throughout the certification lifecycle. Finally, the procedure must include recertification requirements, explaining how personnel maintain or renew their certifications after the initial certification period. Notice that these 6 elements together form a complete quality management system for personnel certification. Omitting even one of them would make the procedure incomplete and potentially non-compliant. Perhaps the most critical requirement appears in Section 5.3. Before the procedure can be used, it must be approved by the employer's designated NDT Level III.
This slide provides an excellent examination aid for remembering the 6 mandatory components of an employer's certification procedure. A useful memory technique is the mnemonic DTEERR, representing duties, training, experience, examinations, records, and recertification. Rather than trying to memorize the exact wording of Section 5.2, remember these 6 categories. During examinations, candidates are often presented with several choices and asked to identify which item does not belong in the employer's certification procedure. Understanding the purpose of each element is far more valuable than simple memorization. The slide also highlights an important audit concern. Even if an organization develops an excellent certification procedure, it cannot be implemented until it has been formally approved by the employer's designated Level III. Missing this approval effectively invalidates the certification process because Section 5.3 has not been satisfied. In real industrial audits, inspectors frequently verify that the current revision of the certification procedure includes documented Levy 3 approval. Missing signatures, outdated revisions, or uncontrolled copies are common nonconformities. For examination purposes, always remember two key facts. First, every certification procedure must contain all 6 mandatory elements. Second, the completed procedure must receive Level 3 approval before any certifications can be issued. Now that we've completed the certification procedure requirements, we'll move into Section 6, which explains one of the most critical qualification requirements of all, the vision examinations.
Before an individual can perform reliable, non-destructive testing, they must possess one essential qualification that no amount of technical knowledge can replace: the ability to see accurately. Section 6.1 establishes the vision requirements that every certified NDT professional must satisfy. The first requirement concerns near-distance visual acuity. CP-189 requires that personnel be capable of reading Jaeger No. 1, or an approved equivalent, at a distance of not less than 12 inches, using either natural or corrected vision. The standard also recognizes several equivalent vision standards, including Snellen, Times Roman print size, orthoradar, and Titmus testing systems. Regardless of the method used, the objective remains the same: to ensure inspectors can clearly observe fine details that may directly affect inspection quality. A significant addition in the 2024 edition concerns vision-enhancing eye drops. CP-189 specifically prohibits the use of pharmacological agents that artificially improve visual acuity during vision examinations. This requirement ensures that the examination reflects the individual's true working capability, rather than a temporary improvement produced by medication. The next requirement addresses color vision. Many NDT methods require inspectors to distinguish colors or shades of gray accurately. For example, liquid penetrant testing relies on the interpretation of colored or fluorescent indications, while digital radiography often requires accurate evaluation of grayscale image contrast. Candidates must therefore demonstrate the ability to differentiate the colors or shades relevant to.
This slide reinforces several key points from the previous section and highlights areas that are frequently tested during certification examinations. The first examination tip concerns the near vision requirement. You should remember the exact wording: Jaeger No. 1, or an approved equivalent, at a distance of not less than 12 inches. This requirement appears regularly in Level 3 examinations because it combines both the vision standard and the required testing distance. The slide also explains why the 2024 edition introduced restrictions on vision-enhancing eye drops. This slide reinforces several key points from the previous section and highlights areas that are frequently tested during certification examinations. The first examination tip concerns the near vision requirement. You should remember the exact wording: Jaeger No. 1, or an approved equivalent, at a distance of not less than 12 inches. This requirement appears regularly in Level 3 examinations because it combines both the vision standard and the required testing distance. The slide also explains why the 2024 edition introduced restrictions on vision-enhancing eye drops. The purpose is to ensure that inspectors demonstrate their genuine visual capability. Artificially improving vision during an examination could conceal an actual deficiency, creating unnecessary risk during critical inspections where accurate visual interpretation is essential. Another valuable insight concerns color vision. Failing a color vision examination does not automatically disqualify someone from every NDT method. Instead, the impact depends on whether the specific inspection technique requires reliable color or grayscale discrimination. Methods such as liquid penetrant testing or interpretation of certain digital images may require normal color perception, while other methods may not. This illustrates an important principle throughout CP-189. Qualification requirements should always be related to the actual responsibilities of the inspection method being performed. As a practical recommendation, organizations should never treat annual vision testing as a routine administrative task.
Vision examinations are an essential quality control measure that help ensure inspectors remain physically capable of detecting relevant indications accurately and consistently throughout their certification period. With the vision requirements now complete, we'll move into the Level 3 examination requirements, where CP-189 explains the general, specific, and practical examinations that form the foundation of employer certification.
We've now completed the vision requirements that every NDT professional must satisfy. The next step in the certification process is understanding the examination requirements for NDT Level III personnel. Unlike Level 1 and Level 2 candidates, Level 3 personnel are expected to demonstrate not only technical expertise, but also the ability to develop procedures, interpret standards, and provide technical leadership within an organization. The first requirement shown on this slide is the initial qualification requirement. Before an employer can administer its own Level 3 certification examinations, the candidate must already hold a current ASNT Level 3 certificate with a valid endorsement for each inspection method being sought. This is one of the fundamental principles of CP-189. Employer certification at the Level 3 stage is built upon an existing ASNT Level 3 credential rather than replacing it. The word current is particularly important. An expired ASNT Level 3 certificate does not satisfy this requirement. Employers must verify that the credential is valid before proceeding with the certification process, and this verification should be documented as part of the employee's qualification records. The next requirement is the specific examination. Unlike the general examination taken during the ASNT certification process, the employer's specific examination focuses on the organization's own technical environment. According to Section 6.2.2, the examination must contain at least 30 questions that evaluate the candidate's understanding of the NDT-related specifications, codes, standards, and procedures used by that employer. An important point highlighted on the slide is that copies of the applicable specifications and standards are available as reference material during this examination.
Now that we've covered the examination requirements for Level 3 personnel, let's shift our attention to the examination process for Level 1 and Level 2 candidates. Section 6.3 explains the 3 examinations that form the foundation of employer certification under CP-189. One of the most important concepts to remember is that certification is not based on a single examination. Instead, every candidate is evaluated through 3 different assessments, each designed to measure a different aspect of professional competency. These are the general examination, the specific examination, and the practical examination. Together, they verify that a candidate possesses theoretical knowledge, understands the employer's requirements, and can successfully perform inspections in the field. Let's begin with the general examination. The general examination evaluates the candidate's technical knowledge of the NDT method. According to CP-189, this examination must be approved by a Level 3 and is conducted as a closed-book examination. However, the Level 3 may provide approved reference charts, formulas, or tables if permitted by the employer's procedure. The questions are based on the body of knowledge contained in ANSI ASNT CP-105, ensuring that candidates are tested on internationally recognized technical fundamentals rather than company-specific practices. The minimum number of examination questions is specified in Table 1, which we'll examine in the next slide. An important update appears in Section 6.3.1.1. CP-189 now recognizes that a valid ACCP, ASNT NDT, or ASNT 9712 Level II certificate may satisfy the general examination requirement, provided the employer accepts it under the conditions specified by the standard. This reduces unnecessary duplication of examinations while maintaining technical integrity. Next, let's discuss the specific examination. While the general examination tests broad technical knowledge, the specific examination focuses on the employer's actual work environment. Candidates are tested on the employer's written procedures, applicable codes and standards, customer specifications, acceptance criteria, inspection equipment, and reporting requirements. Because every organization performs inspections differently, the content of the specific examination varies from one employer to another. The employer's designated Level 3 determines what reference material, if any, will be available during this examination. Section 6.3.2.1 introduces another important provision. A previously completed ACCP,
ASNT NDT, or ASNT 9712 Level II.
In the previous slide, we learned that Level 1 and Level 2 certification requires 3 examinations: the general examination, the specific examination, and the practical examination. This slide introduces Table 1, which specifies the minimum number of written examination questions required for the general and specific examinations for selected NDT methods. Rather than memorizing every number individually, it's more useful to understand the pattern behind the table. You'll notice that for most conventional NDT methods, such as liquid penetrant testing, magnetic particle testing, radiographic testing, ultrasonic testing, eddy current testing, and visual testing, the general examination requires 40 questions for both Level 1 and Level 2. Likewise, the specific examination generally requires 20 questions for both certification levels. This consistent structure simplifies examination development while ensuring that candidates demonstrate a sufficient level of technical knowledge. The general examination evaluates the candidate's understanding of the fundamental principles of the inspection method. These questions are based on the body of knowledge defined in ANSI/ASNT CP-105 and assess topics such as inspection principles, equipment, calibration, terminology, safety, and basic interpretation. Since these fundamentals apply regardless of the employer, the question count remains consistent across many methods. The specific examination, on the other hand, focuses on the employer's procedures, applicable codes, acceptance criteria, equipment, and customer requirements. Although the number of questions is often 20, the content is unique to each employer because it reflects the actual work performed within that organization. Now, let's examine the exceptions shown in the table. One example is radiographic image interpretation for non-radiographers.
In the previous slide, we introduced the passing score requirements for certification. This slide expands on that topic by explaining who is responsible for administering examinations, how examinations are graded, and the rules that ensure every practical examination is fair, consistent, and technically valid. These requirements are contained in Section 6.4 of ANSI ASNT CP-189, and they are particularly important for Level 3 personnel because many of these responsibilities fall directly under their authority. Let's begin with the first requirement: responsibilities under Section 6.4.1. The standard states that a Level 3 holding a valid ASNT Level 3 certificate is responsible for developing, approving, administering, and grading the Level 1 and Level 2 examinations for the methods in which they are certified. This is a significant responsibility because the quality of the employer's entire certification program depends on the competence and integrity of the Level 3. The Level 3 is expected to ensure that examination questions are technically correct, appropriate for the certification level, and consistent with the employer's written practice and applicable industry standards. When the organization conducts Level 3 employer examinations, the employer must designate a qualified individual to administer that process. This helps maintain independence and ensures that the certification system remains objective and well-controlled. The second point on the slide highlights an important 2024 update. CP-189 now permits the grading of multiple choice examinations to be delegated to another individual. However, this flexibility comes with strict. At this point in the course, we've covered all the technical requirements for examination administration and grading. This slide serves as an excellent review and highlights 3 points that every Level 3 candidate should remember before taking the examination. Think of this slide as the passing grade triangle. Each section reinforces a different aspect of certification success: understanding the grading requirements, avoiding common mistakes, and learning from real industry practice. Let's begin with the first panel, labeled Exam Tip. If there is one set of numbers you should remember from Section 6.4, it is this: written examinations require a minimum score of 70%. The practical examination requires a minimum score of 80%. The composite average must also be at least 80% before certification can be granted. These 3 numbers appear repeatedly in CP-189 discussions and are among the most frequently tested numerical requirements in ASNT Level 3 examinations. Many experienced instructors recommend writing these values on your rough worksheet as soon as the examination begins. This helps prevent confusion when answering certification questions that involve examination scoring or candidate eligibility.
Now let's look at the second panel, common mistake. One of the biggest misconceptions among candidates is believing that passing every individual examination automatically means they are eligible for certification. That is not always true. Consider an example. Suppose a candidate scores 70% on the general examination, 70% on the specific examination, and 80% on the practical examination. Although each examination meets its individual minimum passing requirement, the employer must still calculate the overall composite average. If the composite average does not meet the required threshold established by CP-189, certification cannot be issued. The important lesson is that every examination requirement must be satisfied.
We've now completed the qualification requirements, examination structure, and grading criteria. This slide brings all of those topics together by explaining what happens after the examination, whether a candidate fails, who is allowed to administer examinations, and ultimately, who has the authority to issue certification. These final sections are extremely important because they ensure that the certification process remains fair, impartial, and technically defensible. Let's begin with Section 6.5, which covers re-examination. Not every candidate passes on the first attempt, and CP-189 provides a structured process for re-examination rather than allowing unlimited immediate retesting. According to the standard, a candidate who fails an examination has two options before attempting another examination. The first option is to complete additional documented training that addresses the deficiencies identified during the failed examination. The second option is to wait at least 30 days before being re-examined. The purpose of this requirement is straightforward. Certification should represent genuine competency, not repeated guessing or memorization of examination questions. Additional training or a waiting period encourages candidates to strengthen their knowledge before attempting the examination again. The slide also highlights another important rule. A candidate may not be re-examined using the same examination paper or the same practical examination specimen that was previously failed. This protects the integrity of the certification program by ensuring that the re-examination measures improved competency rather than simple familiarity with previous examination materials. Now let's move to Section 6.6, which focuses on examination administration. One of the fundamental principles of any certification system is impartiality. So far, we've focused on how an individual becomes certified. However, earning a certification is only one part of the process. The next question is equally important. How can a certification end, be temporarily suspended, or be permanently revoked? Section 7 of CP-189 answers this question by distinguishing three different certification statuses: expiration, suspension, and revocation. These terms are often confused, but they have very different meanings and consequences. Understanding the differences is essential not only for the ASNT Level III examination, but also for anyone responsible for managing an employer's certification program. Let's begin with expiration, shown in the first row of the table. Expiration is the normal end of a certification period. It does not necessarily indicate poor performance or misconduct. Instead, it simply means that the certification is no longer valid because one of the specified conditions has occurred. For Level 1 and Level II personnel, employer certification expires after 5 years, unless it has already ended because employment was terminated. For Level 3 personnel, employer certification is also dependent on maintaining the underlying ASNT Level III certificate. If that ASNT certification expires, the employer's Level 3 certification can no longer remain valid because one of its fundamental qualification requirements has been lost. In other words, expiration is generally an administrative event rather than a disciplinary action. Now let's move to the second category, suspension. Suspension is different because it is normally temporary. During suspension, the individual is not authorized to perform certified NDT duties until the condition causing the suspension has been corrected. The slide lists several situations that can lead to suspension. The first involves vision examinations. CP-189 requires annual vision verification. If more than 1 year passes without the required vision examination, suspension is suspended until the vision requirements are successfully completed and documented. Another common reason is not performing certified duties for 12 consecutive months. NDT skills require regular application.
If an individual has not actively performed the certified inspection method for an extended period, the employer may suspend the certification until competency has been reestablished. The standard also allows suspension when there is a documented performance deficiency. For example, repeated procedural violations, incorrect interpretation of indications, poor documentation practices, or failure to follow approved inspection procedures may justify temporary suspension, while corrective action.
We've just learned how certifications may expire, be suspended, or even be revoked. The next logical question is, can a certification be restored? Section 7.4 answers that question by defining the official reinstatement pathways. Rather than treating every case the same, CP-189 provides different procedures depending on why the certification became invalid. The key principle to remember is that not every expired or suspended certification requires a complete recertification process. In some situations, reinstatement is relatively straightforward, while in others, the individual must essentially qualify again from the beginning. Let's begin with the first situation: suspended Level 1 and Level 2 certifications. The slide explains that reinstatement for suspended Level 1 and Level 2 personnel is determined by the NDT Level III responsible for the employer certification program. This makes practical sense because the Level 3 is the technical authority who understands why the certification was suspended and what actions are necessary before competency can be restored. For example, if the suspension resulted from an overdue annual vision examination, reinstatement may simply require successfully completing the required vision test and updating the certification records. If the suspension occurred because of documented performance deficiencies, the Level 3 may require additional training, supervised inspections, or a successful practical demonstration before authorizing reinstatement. The important point is that reinstatement is based on technical evaluation, not simply on administrative approval. Now let's discuss suspended Level 3 certifications. In this case, reinstatement is determined by the employer. However, CP-189 clearly identifies one requirement that can never be waived. The individual must continue to possess a valid ASNT Level III certification in the applicable inspection method. This requirement is fundamental because employer certification for Level 3 personnel depends upon maintaining the underlying ASNT credential. Even if the employer wishes to reinstate the individual, it cannot ignore or bypass this prerequisite. If the ASNT Level III certification has expired, reinstatement under Section 7.4 is not possible until that qualification has first been restored. This preserves the integrity of the employer certification program and ensures continued compliance with CP-189. The next topic addresses expired or revoked certifications, which require a more rigorous approach. Unlike suspended certifications,
We've now completed the discussion on certification, suspension, revocation, and reinstatement. The next stage in the certification lifecycle is recertification. Unlike initial certification, recertification focuses on confirming that qualified personnel continue to maintain their technical knowledge and practical competence throughout their careers. Section 8 of CP-189 establishes different recertification requirements for Level 1 and Level 2 personnel compared with Level 3 personnel. As you'll see, the philosophy behind each process is quite different. Let's begin with the left side of the slide, which explains the recertification requirements for Level 1 and Level 2 personnel. The first option is the most straightforward. An employer may recertify an individual by requiring them to successfully complete the Section 6.0 examinations again. This means repeating the written and practical examinations in the same manner as an initial certification. This approach is commonly used when there is uncertainty about continued competency, or when the employer prefers a full reassessment of the individual's knowledge and inspection skills. However, CP-189 also provides an alternative pathway. Instead of repeating every examination every 5 years, the individual may qualify for recertification by demonstrating at least 350 hours of documented experience in the applicable inspection method during the previous 5-year certification period. In addition to meeting this experience requirement, the individual must also successfully pass the specific examination described in Section 6.3.2. This approach recognizes that inspectors who continuously perform NDT in their daily work are actively maintaining and improving their practical skills.
The combination of documented field experience and a current knowledge assessment provides confidence that the individual remains competent without requiring the complete examination process every 5 years. Notice that the experience must be documented. This is an important requirement. Employers should maintain accurate records showing the type of inspections performed, the applicable methods, the dates, and the duration of work performed during the certification cycle. Without proper documentation, those experience hours cannot be used to support recertification. Now let's discuss one of the most important rules shown on this slide. Although the 350-hour experience pathway is available every 5 years, it cannot be used indefinitely. CP-189 requires that at least once every 10 years, the individual must repeat the entire.
In this slide, we'll cover one of the easiest rules to remember for the ASNT CP-189 examination, the 5-10 rule. For Level 1 and Level 2 personnel, recertification can be achieved every 5 years by documenting at least 350 hours of experience in the certification method during that 5-year period, and successfully passing the required specific examination. This provides an experience-based pathway without repeating the complete certification process. However, this option cannot be used forever. At least once every 10 years, the individual must repeat the full Section 6 certification examinations. This mandatory full re-examination ensures that technical knowledge remains current and competency is periodically revalidated. For Level 3 personnel, remember that employer recertification depends on maintaining a current ASNT Level 3 certificate. If the ASNT credential expires, it can trigger suspension and eventually revocation under the employer's CP-189 certification program. Exam tip. Remember this simple formula. 5 years, 350 hours plus a specific exam. 10 years, complete re-examination. This is a frequently tested concept and should be part of your quick revision notes before the exam. Now let's move to Section 9.0, which covers one of the most important responsibilities of every employer under ASNT CP-189, maintaining certification records. The employer is required to keep a complete documentation package for every certified NDT individual. At a minimum, this package must include the training record, certification record, experience record, previous experience record, if applicable, examination results, and current vision examination records. The certification record is the primary document. It must contain the individual's name, certification level, method or technique, any applicable limitations, examination results, certification and expiration dates, and when applicable, suspension, revocation, or reinstatement dates. For Level 3 personnel, a copy of the current ASNT Level 3 certificate must also be maintained. Finally, the record must be signed by both the verifying Level 3 and the certifying authority. A very important revision in the 2024 edition is the definition of the certification date. The certification officially begins on the date the certifying authority signs the certification record, not the date the examination was completed. The expiration date is calculated 5 years from that signing date. The standard also requires detailed training records, including the training provider, dates, total hours, evidence of completion, and instructor's name. Likewise, experience records must document both initial and ongoing experience, while vision examination records must demonstrate compliance with the annual vision requirements. Exam tip. Remember that in this slide, we'll cover the requirements for certificates and wallet cards under Section 9.2.7 of ASNT CP-189 2024. These requirements apply whenever an employer chooses to issue certification certificates or wallet cards to qualified personnel. First, every certificate or wallet card must comply with ASNT Policy G14, which governs the proper use of the ASNT name, acronym, logo, and trademarks. This prevents misuse or misleading representation of ASNT credentials. The certificate must clearly state that the certification is issued under the employer certification procedure, not directly by ASNT. It must also identify the employer's legal name together with the applicable certification procedure number and revision level.
One important change introduced in the 2024 edition is that the certificate must display CP-189 followed by the 4-digit edition year of the employer certification procedure. This identifies exactly which edition of the standard the employer follows. The certificate must also include the certified individual's full legal name, certification level, applicable method or technique, and any limitations or restrictions placed on that certification. Another critical requirement is that both the verifying Level 3 and the certifying authority must provide their printed names and signatures. If either individual holds an ASNT Level 3 certification, the ASNT Level 3 identification number must also be included. Finally, certificates and wallet cards must be completely filled out at the time they are signed. Blank spaces are not permitted, and if any information needs to be changed later, the employer must issue an entirely new certificate or wallet card, rather than modifying the existing one. Exam tip. Remember that a certificate issued under CP-189 is an employer-issued certification, not an ASNT-issued credential. For the Level 3 basic examination, expect questions about the mandatory information required on certificates, the 2024 edition year requirement, and the signatures needed to make the certification valid.
As we reach the final technical section of ASNT CP-189 2024, let's review the key referenced publications. These documents form the technical foundation that supports the requirements throughout the standard. The first reference is ANSI/ASNT CP-105, which provides the standard topical outlines used to develop NDT training courses. Whenever CP-189 specifies training requirements, the course content is expected to align with CP-105. Next is the ASNT NDT Level II program, also known as CP-ASNT. This is the Personal Level III certification program referenced throughout sections 2.2 and 6.2. Candidates seeking employer Level III certification must first hold a current ASNT Level III certificate in the applicable method. The standard also references the ASNT Central Certification Program, or CP1, commonly known as ACCP. Under specified conditions, ACCP certifications may satisfy certain general, specific, or practical examination requirements when the employer's Level 3 has evaluated and documented their equivalency. Another important addition in the 2024 edition is the ASNT 9712 certification program, which aligns with ISO 9712. This program is now referenced throughout CP-189 as an accepted certification pathway where applicable. The standard also cites ASNT Policy G14, which governs the correct use of the ASNT name, acronym, logo, and trademarks on employer-issued certificates and wallet cards. Finally, ASTM E1316 is referenced as the official source of standardized NDT terminology. In the 2024 edition, it provides the updated definition. Now we'll review one of the most important slides in this course, the 12 substantive revisions introduced in the 2024 edition of ANSI ASNT CP-189. These changes are frequently tested in Level 3 examinations and are highly relevant during employer and client audits. The first revision requires the employer to assess and document that any reference certification examinations satisfy the employer's own certification requirements before they can be accepted. This reinforces employer responsibility throughout the certification process. The second change adds the ASTM E1316 definition of non-destructive testing, providing a clear distinction between NDT and predictive maintenance terminology. The third revision clarifies that individuals who previously held neutron radiography or vibration analysis Level 3 certifications remain valid through the established recertification process. The fourth update introduces the ASNT 9712 certification program alongside the existing ACCP program, with a 5-year transition period for implementation. Next, Section 6.1.1 now prohibits the use of vision-enhancing eye drops during vision examinations. Additional guidance may be issued later by the ASNT Technical Advisory Group. The sixth revision allows an ACCP ASNT NDT or ASNT 9712 general examination to satisfy the employer's general examination requirement, provided the applicable requirements are met. Revision 7 introduces a new requirement stating that personnel who administer written multiple-choice examinations must be trained and that training must be properly documented.
Revision 8 creates an entirely new Section 6.8, formally establishing that certification of NDT personnel is the responsibility of the employer. The ninth change updates Table 1 by adding examination question requirements for digital radiography, computed radiography, and computed tomography image interpretation. Revision 10 clarifies that the official certification date is the date the certifying authority signs the certification record after all qualification requirements have been completed. The 11th revision requires the name of the certified individual to be included explicitly in the certification record, improving documentation consistency. Finally, the 12th revision updates Appendix B by adding training and experience requirements for DR, CR, and CT.
In this slide, we'll compare the three most common NDT personnel qualification and certification systems you'll encounter in industry: ANSI ASNT CP-189, SNT TC-1A, and central certification programs such as ACCP and ASNT 9712. Understanding these differences is essential for both Level 3 examinations and real-world projects. Let's begin with who performs the certification. Under CP-189, personnel are certified by the employer according to a written certification procedure. Likewise, SNT TC-1A is also an employer-based certification system using the employer's written practice. In contrast, ACCP and ASNT 9712 are central certification programs where the certification is issued directly by the certifying body rather than the employer. The next difference is the governing status. CP-189 is an American national standard, meaning its requirements use mandatory language, such as shall. SNT TC-1A is a recommended practice, which uses advisory language, such as should. ACCP and ASNT 9712 follow the rules established by their respective certification schemes. Another important distinction is portability. Both CP-189 and SNT TC-1A certifications are generally not portable. When an employee changes companies, the new employer must evaluate and certify that individual under its own written procedure or written practice. However, ACCP and ASNT 9712 certifications are portable, meaning the credential belongs to the individual and is recognized independently of a specific employer. Now let's consider their typical applications. CP-189 is commonly specified for ASME code fabrication shops, API facilities, refineries, petrochemical plants, and projects requiring compliance with an ANSI standard. SNT TC-1A is widely used for traditional in-house employer qualification programs. ACCP and ASNT 9712 are commonly selected for third-party inspection organizations, multinational companies, and cross-border projects where a portable.
Throughout this course, we've discussed the requirements of ANSI ASNT CP-189 from a technical perspective. This slide shifts our focus from the standard itself to the real-world mistakes that inspectors, QA engineers, and employers commonly make during implementation. These are not theoretical examples. They represent issues that frequently appear during customer audits, third-party assessments, and accreditation reviews. Understanding these mistakes will help you avoid costly non-conformances and strengthen your employer certification program. Let's begin with the first topic: documentation gaps. One of the most common audit findings is missing signatures on certification records. CP-189 requires certification records to be signed by both the verifying Level 3 and the certifying authority whenever these are separate positions. Both signatures demonstrate that the candidate's qualifications have been technically verified and formally approved before certification is issued. In practice, organizations sometimes obtain only the Level 3 signature and forget the certifying authority's approval, or vice versa. Although the candidate may have completed all training, examinations, and experience requirements, the certification record remains incomplete. During an audit, an unsigned certification record may be treated as evidence that the certification process was never officially completed. This highlights an important lesson. Technical competence alone is not sufficient. Documentation must also demonstrate compliance. The second field experience concerns expired vision examinations. Earlier in this course, we learned that annual vision examinations are mandatory. One of the most frequent administrative mistakes is allowing the vision examination interval to exceed 12 months. According to Section 7.2.1, once the required interval has been exceeded, the individual's certification is automatically suspended until the vision requirements are satisfied. This issue is especially common during refinery shutdowns and major maintenance projects, where organizations focus on production schedules while overlooking certification due dates.
Imagine assigning an inspector to perform critical weld inspections, only to discover during a client audit that the annual vision examination expired several weeks earlier. Even though the inspections may have been performed correctly, the individual certification status is no longer valid.
Throughout this course, we've studied the requirements of ANSI ASNT CP-189 section by section. This slide brings everything together by presenting technical and scenario-based interview questions that are commonly asked during Level 3 interviews, client audits, and QAQC management discussions. Rather than simply memorizing answers, it's important to understand the reasoning behind each one, because interviewers are usually evaluating your understanding of the standard, not just your ability to recall specific clauses. Let's begin with the first question. Who is legally responsible for certifying NDT personnel under CP-189? This is one of the most fundamental questions in the entire standard. The correct answer is the employer. CP-189 establishes the minimum requirements for qualification and certification, but it does not certify personnel itself. Certification authority and the associated responsibility rests with the employer through its written certification procedure. The process is administered by the employer's designated Level 3 and finalized by the certifying authority. This distinction is important because many candidates incorrectly assume that ASNT certifies Level 1 and Level 2 personnel. In reality, ASNT may certify Level 3 personnel through its certification programs, but employer certification under CP-189 remains the employer's responsibility. Now, let's examine the second scenario. A Level 2 candidate scores 95% on the general examination, 90% on the specific examination, but only 75% on the practical examination. Can this individual be certified? The answer is no. Although the written examination scores are excellent, Section 6.4.2 requires a minimum practical examination score of 80%. Because the practical score is only 75%, the candidate fails regardless of the overall composite average. This illustrates an important principle in CP-189. Each examination has its own minimum acceptance requirement. Outstanding performance in one examination cannot compensate for failure in another when the standard establishes an independent passing criteria. We've now completed our study of the major requirements of ANSI ASNT CP-189 2024. This section shifts from learning the standard to applying it, using examination-style multiple-choice questions similar to those encountered during Level 3 basic examinations and employer qualification tests. When answering these questions, don't rely on memory alone. Instead, think about which section of the standard supports the answer. That approach not only improves your examination performance, but also helps you apply CP-189 correctly in your daily work. Let's begin with question 1. The question asks, per CP-189, what is the minimum composite average grade required for NDT Level 1 and Level 2 certification eligibility? The options are 70%, 75%, 80%, and 90%. The correct answer is 80%. This is one of the most important numerical requirements in the entire standard. Many candidates remember that the written examinations require 70%, but they forget that certification is based on 3 separate requirements. First, each written examination must achieve a minimum score of 70%. Second, the practical examination requires a minimum score of 80%. Finally, and most importantly, the overall composite average must also be at least 80% before the candidate becomes eligible for certification. This means a candidate must satisfy both the individual examination requirements and the composite average requirement. Passing one requirement does not eliminate the others. A useful examination strategy is to immediately associate the number 80 with 2 concepts: 80% practical examination and 80% composite average. Remembering this pair helps avoid confusion during the examination. Now, let's move to question 2. The question asks, a candidate fails a Level 2 specific examination. What is the minimum waiting period before re-examination if no additional documented training is completed? The available choices are 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, and 90 days. The correct answer is 30 days. Section 6.5 explains that when a candidate fails an examination, there are 2 possible pathways before another examination can be attempted. The first option is to complete additional documented training that specifically addresses the areas in which the candidate demonstrated deficiencies.
The second option, if no additional training is provided, is to wait at least 30 days before taking the exam.
Now let's continue with our certification examination practice by working through two additional questions. These questions focus on two important concepts introduced in the 2024 edition of CP-189: examination independence and delegation of multiple choice examination grading. Both are frequently discussed during Level 3 examinations and quality audits. Let's begin with question 3. The question asks, who may prepare and administer an NDT Level I certification examination? The available options are the candidate's direct supervisor, a subordinate of the candidate, the candidate being examined, anyone except the candidate or their subordinate. The correct answer is option D. Section 6.6 establishes one of the most important principles in any certification program: impartiality. The standard clearly states that an examination shall never be prepared or administered by the individual being examined or by that individual's subordinate. This requirement prevents conflicts of interest and protects the integrity of the certification process. Think about a practical example. Suppose a quality control manager is taking a Level 3 examination. It would be inappropriate for one of the inspectors who reports directly to that manager to prepare or administer the examination. Even if the examination were technically correct, the reporting relationship could create the appearance of favoritism or influence. Likewise, allowing a candidate to prepare or administer their own examination would completely undermine the credibility of the certification program. The purpose of Section 6.6 is to ensure that every candidate is evaluated through an independent and unbiased process. Now let's move to question 4. The question asks, under the 2024 edition, what must accompany delegation of multiple choice examination grading to non-Level 3 personnel? The options are nothing, grading may be delegated freely, documented training of the person administering or grading the examination, approval from ASNT headquarters, a separate written contract. The correct answer is option B.
Let's continue our certification examination practice with another two multiple choice questions. This set focuses on certification validity periods and one of the important terminology updates introduced in the 2024 edition of ANSI ASNT CP-189. Both questions test your understanding of fundamental concepts rather than memorization alone. Let's begin with question 5. The question asks, an NDT Level 1 or Level 2 individual's certification expires automatically after how many years, absent earlier termination? The options are 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. The correct answer is 5 years. Section 7.1.2 states that Level 1 and Level 2 certifications expire on the last day of the month in which the 5-year certification period ends, unless the certification has already expired because employment ended or it has been extended through the recertification process. It is important to understand that this is the normal certification cycle. However, certification can end before the 5-year period under certain conditions. For example, if employment is terminated, employer certification generally ends because employer certification is linked to the employer's written certification procedure. Likewise, if recertification requirements are not completed before the expiration date, the certification will expire at the end of the 5-year period. One common examination mistake is confusing the 5-year certification period with the 10-year full re-examination requirement discussed in Section 8. Remember that these are separate requirements. 5 years refers to the certification cycle, while 10 years refers to the maximum interval before repeating the full Section 6 qualification examinations. Now let's move to question 6. The question asks, which document is the source of the 2024 ASNT CP-189 definition of non-destructive testing added in Section 2.1.15? The options are ASNT CP-105, ASTM E1316, ISO 9712.
We're now in the final set of practice questions for this course. These two questions focus on topics that are frequently tested because they combine technical knowledge with practical application: reinstatement after employment termination, and the mandatory near-distance vision requirements for NDT personnel. Let's begin with question 7. The question asks, an individual's NDT Level 1 or Level 2 certification expired solely due to termination of employment.
Under what maximum time window may they be reinstated without a new examination? The available options are 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. The correct answer is 12 months. This requirement comes directly from Section 7.4.3.3 of CP-189. However, remember that the 12-month period alone is not enough. The standard requires 3 conditions to be satisfied before reinstatement without a new examination is permitted. First, the employer must have maintained all required certification records in accordance with Section 9. Second, the individual certification must not have expired during the period of employment termination. Third, the employee must be reinstated within 12 months of the employment termination date. Many candidates remember only the 12-month limit and overlook the other 2 requirements. From an examination standpoint, if any one of these 3 conditions is not met, the individual cannot simply be reinstated without additional qualification. The employer must instead follow one of the qualification or recertification pathways specified elsewhere in the standard. This requirement is particularly useful in industries where qualified NDT personnel frequently move between projects or employers. Rather than repeating the entire certification process for a short employment break, CP-189 permits reinstatement when the required records have been preserved and the interruption falls within the specified limits. Now let's move to question 8. The question asks, what near-distance visual acuity standard must NDT personnel meet according to Section 6.1.1? The options include several different vision standards, but the correct answer is Jaeger No. 1 or an equivalent standard at a distance of not less than 12 inches. This is one of the most frequently tested vision requirements in CP-189. Section 6.1.1 requires that the individual have natural or corrected near-distance visual acuity in at least one eye, capable of reading Jaeger No. 1 or an equivalent test pattern at a distance of not less than 12 inches. The standard also recognizes equivalent measurements such as Snellen 2022, Times Roman 3.5 point type, OrthoRadar No. 9, and Titmus SAB, SAL, or SAR1 No. 10. The purpose of this requirement is straightforward. NDT personnel routinely evaluate fine details such as weld discontinuities, radiographic images, ultrasonic instrument displays, magnetic particle indications, and penetrant indications. Adequate near vision is therefore essential for reliable inspection.
We've reached one of the most important slides in the entire course. If you're preparing for the ASNT Level III Basic Examination, this is your rapid revision sheet. These are the numerical values that appear repeatedly throughout CP-189 and are among the most frequently tested requirements. Rather than memorizing them individually, understand what each number represents and where it is applied. Let's begin with the examination grading requirements. The first number is 70%. This is the minimum passing score for each written examination, including both the general and specific examinations. A candidate scoring below 70% on either written examination does not satisfy the minimum qualification requirement. The next important number is 80%. This value appears twice in CP-189. First, the practical examination requires a minimum passing score of 80%. Second, the overall composite average across all required examinations must also be at least 80% before certification can be granted. Many candidates remember one of these requirements but forget the other. For the examination, always associate 80% with both the practical examination and the composite average. Next, remember that the Level 3 specific examination must contain a minimum of 30 questions. This is the minimum examination size specified by the standard for evaluating knowledge of the employer's procedures, products, codes, and specifications. Now, let's review the re-examination requirement. If a candidate fails an examination and does not complete additional documented training, the minimum waiting period before re-examination is 30 days. In addition, the re-examination cannot use the same examination paper or practical specimen that the candidate previously failed. The next number concerns vision examinations. Near-distance visual acuity must be verified annually, while color vision is verified at recertification, as summarized on this revision slide. Maintaining current vision records is essential because exceeding the required interval can result in certification suspension. Moving to the certification cycle, remember that Level 1 and Level 2 certifications are valid for 5 years.
During those 5 years, an alternative recertification pathway is available. Instead of repeating the complete qualification examinations every cycle, the individual may qualify by documenting 350 hours of experience in the applicable method over the 5-year period and successfully passing the specific examination, provided the requirements of Section 8.1.1 are met. However, there is an important limitation. The 350-hour pathway cannot be used indefinitely. At least every 10 years, the individual must repeat the full Section 6 qualification examinations. This mandatory re-examination ensures that long-term certified personnel periodically demonstrate their complete competency. Now, let's review the inactivity limit. If certified duties in a method have not been performed for 12 consecutive months, the certification is subject to suspension. If that inactivity continues for 24 consecutive months, the certification progresses to revocation.
Congratulations on completing this course on ANSI ASNT CP-189 2024. In this final technical summary, let's consolidate the most important concepts that every NDT professional should remember for both the ASNT Level III Basic Examination and practical implementation in industry. The first and most important takeaway is understanding what CP-189 actually is. CP-189 is an employer-based, ANSI-approved standard. It establishes the minimum requirements for qualifying and certifying NDT personnel, but it does not certify individuals itself. The actual certification is issued by the employer through its written certification procedure, which must be approved by the employer's designated NDT Level III. This principle forms the foundation of the entire standard and is one of the most frequently tested concepts in Level III examinations. The second key takeaway concerns the qualification system. Throughout this course, we've learned that CP-189 recognizes 6 qualification levels, each with defined responsibilities and qualification requirements. Certification decisions are based on 3 examination types: the general examination, the specific examination, and the practical examination. Together, these examinations ensure that candidates possess theoretical knowledge, employer-specific understanding, and demonstrated practical competence. Just as important is the grading structure. Remember the numbers that should now be second nature. 70% minimum for each written examination, 80% minimum for the practical examination, 80% minimum overall composite average for certification eligibility. These 3 values govern every certification decision under CP-189 and should be committed to memory before entering any Level III examination. The third major concept involves maintaining certification. Certification is not permanent. We discussed that 12 consecutive months without performing certified duties results in suspension, while 24 consecutive months of inactivity leads to revocation. These requirements